Today on Sports Central, we're going to be going over our next scheduled preview of this 2020 offseason, and it's going to be over the Michigan Wolverines. And this is a team that went 9-4 in the 2019 season. It was more of a disappointing year for this team, but nonetheless, in this video, we're going to be going over a few players this team will be losing, who they're going to be returning, and also going over their schedule for the first time this offseason. So, looking at the games that Michigan has had since November, they had 3 really good wins against Maryland, Michigan State, and Indiana. Of course, all 3 of those teams are more mediocre, but still they had 3 really good wins in there. They beat Maryland 38-7, and then they also beat Michigan State 44-10, and Indiana on the road 39-14. Let me remind you, Indiana was a team that made a bowl game last year. Indiana is no pushover team. But nonetheless, they played Ohio State at home in the Big House, ended up losing that one 27-56. And I tell you what, Michigan just can't get over the hump of beating Ohio State. And I'm not sure what it's going to take for them to get over that hump. But once they can beat Ohio State, I'm sure Michigan could easily be a college football playoff contender. Honestly, if they would have beaten Ohio State there, they would have been totally in the mix for that. But nonetheless, they lost to Alabama then on January 1st. Bowl game 16-35. They lost to them in the Citrus Bowl. So nonetheless, the trend from Michigan last season, they were 6-2 between September and October, and 3-2 between November and the postseason, and they were rolling into that game against Ohio State once again, but they just could not get it done against Ohio State. That's what really affected their season. But nonetheless, here are some key points for Michigan heading into this offseason. They lose their starting quarterback, Shea Patterson, so that's going to be a really tough loss there. Of course, he had over 3,000 yards last season, 23 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, and overall he had a really good year for this team, no doubt. They returned their top running back, Zach Charbonnet, which he had just over 750 yards of rushing and 11 touchdowns, so that's going to be a good return. And they also returned their second running back in Hazan Haskins, who he had 662 yards and 4 touchdowns as well. So the running back core from Michigan will look pretty good next season, no doubt. The wide receiver core more the same as well. They returned their top wide receiver, Ronnie Bell, which he had just around 750 receiving yards and 1 touchdown. And then they returned their second wide receiver, Nico Collins, as well, which he was a big impact for this team too, with 730 yards and 7 touchdowns. So they do lose their third wide receiver in Donovan Peoples-Jones. Of course, he had a bit of an impact on this team. He had just over 400 yards of receiving and 6 touchdowns too, so he was a big impact. But they lose 4 offensive linemen is the big kicker here, as well as 3 linebackers and 2 in the secondary. So this team is losing a lot. The wide receiver and running back cores look pretty good, but losing a quarterback and 4 offensive linemen, that's almost the entire offensive line, once again, as well as 3 linebackers and 2 in the secondary. That's going to be tough to deal with for Michigan. And of course, will be a rebuilding season ahead. I know I've heard from some analysts that they're going to say that Michigan is going to have more of a rebuilding year next year, and rightfully so. I mean, when you're losing as much as Michigan is losing this offseason, there's many reasons to think that. But nonetheless, I think that Michigan still has a lot of potential here. When you got your top running back, your second running back, and also your top 2 wide receivers back, there's a lot of potential there. But of course, if they need to fill up the quarterback position, if any of those cores are even going to succeed. Nonetheless, what's the possibility for them winning the Big Ten East next season? I think to beat Ohio State and Penn State next season, it's going to be a push. I think both those teams really are looking really good heading into next season. And of course, Michigan, they're more on the other end of that. Once again, all the talent that they're losing, it's going to be tough for Michigan next season. Looking at their schedule for the first time, though, you start off the season against Washington on the road on September 5th. And that should be an interesting game there. Of course, both those teams had more disappointing 2019 season, so to say. But nonetheless, a week after that, they got Ball State at home, then it's Arkansas State, so 2 easier games there. And then you get some challenges going. You got Wisconsin and Penn State in back-to-back weeks, 2 big-time challenges, as well as Michigan State and Minnesota on the road. So that stretch between late September and mid-October is going to be really tough. But then you get the later end of things. Once you get into late October into November, you got Purdue, Maryland at home, as well as Rutgers and Indiana. So those 4 games are definitely winnable for Michigan. And of course, you got that huge challenge once again at the end of the season against Ohio State, and this year it's going to be in Columbus. But nonetheless, here's what I'm kind of expecting right now. I'm only going to give you 3 wins for Michigan as of this point. Once again, we'll be going over all of these games and all of my predictions once we get to summer and we get into our official predictions. But nonetheless, I'm going to say Michigan beats Ball State, Arkansas State, and Rutgers. Those are your 3 guaranteed wins for Michigan, and that's going to give them a record estimation of 8-4 to 10-2. Once again, Michigan's losing a lot of talent, and I don't think that they're going to be able to win the Big Ten East this season. I think if they would have had a chance to win the Big Ten East, that would have been in 2019. I mean, we were looking into the 2019 season, and I was talking about Michigan being a potential college football playoff contender. And looking at how Michigan fared out last season, it just was a huge disappointment. I mean, they returned most of their talent from the 2018 season, and if you look back at last offseason, I mean, yeah, this team had a ton of potential, and I mean, they don't have near as much potential this season, but they still have a lot of talent to work with, no doubt about it. So it'll be interesting to see how they fare. But nonetheless, yeah, for Michigan, record estimation 8-4 to 10-2 is what I'm expecting right now. Nonetheless, that about wraps up this video. Of course, once again, we're getting into late February right now, and that's kind of the point of a schedule preview, just to give you a quick little preview before we hit into spring. But nonetheless, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Michigan. Let me know your early thoughts on Michigan in the comments below. Let me know your record predictions too. I find those interesting. But thank you guys all for watching. Thanks for sticking around. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central, and I will see you all later.